Sofia Rivera was the kind of woman who made people feel safe just by being in the same room. She had a warm smile, an easy laugh, and a heart that gave more than it ever received. She worked as a school teacher in Chicago, waking up every morning before sunrise to prepare lessons for children who needed someone to believe in them. She was not rich. She was not powerful, but she was genuinely good, and in a world full of noise, that kind of goodness is rare. For 4 years, she loved Daniel Mercer with everything she had. Daniel was handsome and charming, the kind of man who walked into a room and made everyone feel like they had been waiting for him. He worked in marketing, wore expensive watches he could not quite afford, and talked endlessly about the life he was going to build. Sofia believed every word. She stayed in Chicago when a better job came up in another city. She cooked his meals, listened to his problems, and held his hand through his failures, as if they were her own. She was patient in the way only someone truly in love can be. But Daniel had eyes for more than what was in front of him. Her name was Vivian Ashford. She was the daughter of one of Chicago's most powerful real estate families, and she was everything Daniel had always chased: money, status, and a last name that opened doors. He had met her at a corporate dinner 6 months before Sofia found out, and whatever promises he had made to Sofia, he made different ones to Vivian. Sofia discovered the truth the way people often do, by accident. She was scrolling through her phone one quiet Sunday evening when she saw it. A social media post. Daniel and Vivian, smiling at the camera, his arm around her shoulders. The caption read, "She said yes." The phone slipped from Sofia's hands. She sat very still for a long time. She did not cry right away. She called Daniel, and he picked up on the second ring, and before she could say a word, she heard it in his voice. He already knew she had seen it. He came over that night. He sat across from her at the kitchen table she had chosen, in the apartment she had decorated, and he told her, without trembling, that Vivian was a better fit for the direction his life was heading. He said Sofia was wonderful, but she was too simple for what he needed now. He picked up a small box of his things and left without looking back. Sofia closed the door behind him, sat down on the kitchen floor, and fell apart completely. Her best friend, Nadia, came over the next morning and did not leave for 3 days. She brought food Sofia did not eat and made her drink water and held her while she cried. But Nadia also said something important on the second day, quietly, while Sofia stared at the ceiling. "You are not what he left behind. He is what you survived." Sofia did not believe that yet, but she filed it away. By the second month, she was functioning again. By the third, she was sleeping through the night. And somewhere in the 4th month, a job offer arrived. A teaching position at a private school in Milan, Italy. The salary was better. The opportunity was real. And Chicago, with its familiar streets and painful memories, suddenly felt like a coat that no longer fit. She took the job. She told herself it was about her career. She told herself she was not running. She was almost right on both counts. Milan received her the way certain cities receive certain people, like it had been waiting. She found a small apartment near the school, learned to navigate the tram system, and discovered that teaching children in a second language required a level of creativity that made her better at her job. She bought herself coffee every morning from a bakery around the corner, and sat outside even when it was cold, watching the city move, feeling, slowly and then all at once, like herself again. 3 weeks after arriving, she was invited to a fundraising gala hosted by a literacy nonprofit she had begun volunteering with on weekends. She almost did not go. She did not own anything fancy enough for a gala. Nadia talked her into it over a video call, and Sofia borrowed a dress from a colleague and went. She stood near the tall windows at the far end of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water, half watching the crowd and half thinking about the lesson plan she had left unfinished on her desk. That was when she felt someone watching her. She turned, and he was already walking toward her. Marco Vitali was 35 years old, tall, and dressed in a dark suit that looked like it had been made specifically for him. He moved through the crowded room without hurrying, and there was something about the way he carried himself, completely still in his own center, that made everyone else seem slightly louder by comparison. He stopped in front of her and said simply, "Marco." Sofia, who had no idea who he was and no reason to be impressed, said her name, and asked if he was one of the donors. He smiled, a real smile, the kind that surprised the person wearing it, and said, something like that. They talked for 3 hours that night. He asked about her students, and she told him about a boy in her class who could not read 6 weeks ago, and who had read 3 pages aloud that Friday without stopping. Marco listened, the way people rarely listen, without waiting for his turn to speak. He told her about books he had loved as a child, about growing up in Milan, about a grandfather who had taught him that the only things worth building were the things that lasted. He was direct without being cold, confident without being arrogant. By the end of the evening, Sophia realized she had laughed more in those 3 hours than she had in the entire previous year. He asked if he could see her again. She said yes before she had finished thinking about it. What followed were weeks of slow, careful mornings and long evenings. Coffee near the cathedral. A Sunday afternoon in a used bookshop that Marco, she eventually discovered, owned as a hobby. Long phone calls after she finished grading. He was present in a way that felt foreign to her, not performing attention, not half listening while checking his phone, just genuinely, quietly there. Sophia was aware that she was falling. She was also afraid, because the last time she had fallen this far, she had hit the ground. But she kept showing up. It was 6 weeks in, when things became complicated. She overheard 2 of Marco's associates speaking near the doorway of his office. Fast, low Italian, they clearly assumed she would not understand. She understood every word. She left that evening without saying anything. She walked home alone, the city warm and loud around her, and she turned what she had heard over and over in her mind. Marco Vitali was not just a real estate developer and a philanthropist. He was the head of the Vitali family, one of the oldest and most quietly powerful crime organizations in northern Italy. Not the kind seen in movies, with dramatic violence and public chaos. The kind with lawyers and politicians, and an authority so settled into the city's fabric that most people simply worked around it without knowing why. Sophia sat at her apartment window until 4 in the morning. She asked herself every hard question she could think of. She did not find easy answers, but she was honest enough to admit that what she felt for him was real, and honest enough to know that she could not pretend she had not heard what she heard. The next morning, she went back. She did not yell. She sat across from him and asked him, in the same calm voice she used with students who needed the truth, to tell her everything. He did, all of it. He did not soften it or redirect it. He told her about his family, about inheriting something he had not asked for when his father died and he was 22 and not ready. He told her about the decisions he had made since then. Some he stood behind, some he carried with difficulty. He told her that if she walked away, he would understand completely. Then he said something she did not expect. He told her that he had not planned on her, that she had arrived in his life like something he did not know was missing, that sitting across from her was the first time in years he had said only what he actually meant. Sophia listened to all of it. Then she stood up, thanked him for being honest, and left. She spent the next 12 hours alone. She did not call Nadia. She did not want to be talked into anything or out of anything. She wanted to think. She came back the next morning with conditions. She would never be made part of anything that caused harm. Her students and her work were not to be touched or used. She would not play a role or be managed. And she would always be spoken to honestly, the way he had just spoken to her. Or she would leave without looking back. Marco agreed to every term, not reluctantly, not the way someone agrees to rules they plan to quietly ignore. He agreed the way a man agrees when he knows someone just said exactly the right thing. Later, one of his most trusted associates asked him privately what he saw in a schoolteacher from Chicago. Marco was quiet for a moment, then he said, "It's the only person who has spoken to me in years, without either fearing me or wanting something from me. That is rarer than you think." It was around this time that a letter arrived from Chicago. Daniel Mercer's engagement to Vivian Ashford had quietly ended. The Ashford family had discovered that Daniel had been unfaithful during the engagement itself. A brief but undeniable incident with a junior colleague at his firm. Without the Ashford name to support his career, several professional doors had begun to close. Daniel, who had always needed a ladder to stand on, had lost his footing. He wrote to Sophia, first a text, then a voicemail, then a handwritten letter, forwarded through her mother. He called her the one he should never have let go. He said he had been a fool. He asked for the chance to make things right. Sophia read the letter once, folded it neatly, and placed it in her recycling bin. She did not respond. There was nothing to say. That chapter had not ended badly. It had simply ended, the way things end when they were never quite right to begin with. Marco proposed 4 months later. There was no audience, no grand gesture planned for someone else's camera. He took her to the small bookshop on a quiet Thursday afternoon, and he got down on one knee between a row of poetry books and a shelf of old Italian novels, and he held up a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a simple band with a single sapphire, and he looked at her with the most unguarded expression she had ever seen on his face. He said he did not have a speech prepared. He said he only knew that every good thing in the past year had somehow had her in the center of it. Sophia said yes. They were married 4 months later, in a small ceremony outside the city. 60 guests, wildflowers on every table. Sophia wore her mother's dress, taken in at the waist. The late afternoon sun came through the tall windows of the villa and made everything look like something out of a painting. The moment people would talk about for years came near the end of the reception. An older man stood up, a man who had known Marco since childhood, who had watched him grow from a frightened 22-year-old into the man sitting at that table. He raised his glass and said, simply and without drama, "In 40 years, I have never once seen this man afraid of anything. Tonight, I think he is afraid she will eventually realize she is too good for all of us. The rest of us should be so lucky as to be terrified of losing something this worth keeping." The room laughed warmly. A few people wiped their eyes. Marco looked at Sophia. Sophia looked back. She had once sat on a kitchen floor in Chicago, completely undone by someone who had called her too simple. She had picked herself up, packed her things, crossed an ocean, and somehow found her way to this table, this room, this moment. She was not too simple. She had simply been in the wrong story. In the years that followed, Sophia kept teaching. She helped expand the literacy program Marco had quietly funded for years, taking it into 4 additional cities across Italy. She became known in those circles not as Marco Vitali's wife, but as the woman who could walk into a classroom full of struggling children and walk out with them believing they could read. Marco, for his part, made changes. Not all at once, not with announcements, but quietly, steadily. The parts of his world that could not stand beside her values were let go. His associates noticed. Nobody said anything directly, but everyone understood. Some people are changed by love, the way a river is changed by rain, slowly, from the inside, until what was there before is impossible to find. Daniel Mercer, by all accounts, moved on. He remarried. He lives in the suburbs now. By appearances, he is content. But people who knew both of them, who knew Sophia in those 4 years, and knew what she poured into that relationship, always say the same thing when his name comes up. He left her because he thought she was not enough for the life he was trying to build. He never understood that she was the reason a life was worth building at all.